Looking at the title of this talk and considering this group, it's like I'm preaching to the choir here. And I think the answer would be a resounding yes to my question, but it's a little more complicated than that. And the reason why is these images that I'm projecting up here, these were never intended to be art. One, of course, is Berenice Abbott, who I'll be speaking about, was photographs for college textbooks when she worked at MIT. The other is Anna Atkins, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, but her photographs, again, were never designed as fine art pieces, but yet they exist now in museums, and both of these are sort of the chosen few in scientific photography. As a matter of fact, Anna Atkins wasn't even known about until the early 1980s. If you look at Beaumont Newhall's History of Photography, she's not even mentioned. But nowadays, she's everywhere. So the sciences and arts share a common creative aesthetic. For example, there's beauty in a well-designed experiment, and many leading scientists are active in the creative process. Whether it's an elegant solution to a scientific problem, writing, painting, sculpture, or music, the so-called creative arts. So the arts and sciences really share a common aesthetic of discovery through observation. And it's the one thing that artists and scientists share, and that is the curiosity that both this artist and scientist have. So what I'd like to talk to you about is really just to shine a light on some of the changing relationships between photography, art, and science across a wide range of cultural contexts. And as I just mentioned, Anna Atkins, recently, earlier this year, there was an amazing exhibit up in New York at the Public Library. And it contained things like this. They actually have the original book that she signed to Sir John Herschel in their collection. And as I mentioned, she wasn't even known about in the 60s and 70s, but only about a few obscure photo historians. But there was a fellow by the name of Larry Schaff, who is the world's leading expert on William Henry Fox Talbot as well as Anna Atkins. And he published a book back in early 1980 called Sun Gardens. And it's all about, well, you can see the images. But the amazing things, she was only popular for about 10 years, and her photographs were used in scientific purposes. But the problem was with these cyanotypes, as beautiful as we think they are nowadays, they didn't show the same scientific information as you could look at a pressed plant. All they showed was white in this floating blue ocean. So if you were a botanist, they really weren't that informative. But now we look at these as great works of art, and if you can buy one of these, they sell for tens of thousands of dollars for just a single print. Here's Anna, very happy looking soul. But her book, Photographs of British Algae. And they really are just absolutely beautiful. All very scientifically accurate, but again, they didn't show the surface detail. And the other photograph I had on the title slide was Berenice Abbott. And of course, many of you probably know her. She had a long, illustrious career in photography, but she was Man Ray's assistant. She photographed and befriended him, not necessarily, and then she also was a good friend of Eugene Algae. And she's the one who actually bought his collection after he died and worked long and hard to try to sell it, and it wound up at the museum, Metropolitan Museum of Art. But she also documented in the 30s the changing of New York, where a lot of these buildings were destroyed. Now these pieces, again, they were shot as documentary photographs, but nowadays if you go to a high-end gallery, you'll find these for tens of thousands of dollars. But she also did science when she was a science photographer up at MIT. She did a lot of different things. Here she is actually in the lab, the studio working. But she actually is credited with inventing the photo vest. She invented the monopod, all kinds of different things. And she lived, I believe, until she was 102, just died a few years back. But these are some of the amazing images that she made for documenting science. Again, they were never designed to be used as fine art, and they were used in physics and college textbooks. Just amazing images. to show magnetism, to show the properties of light. And it's kind of ironic, when you look back in history, photography was invented by both an artist and a scientist, which is kind of ironic. Of course, we all know Daguerre, the French inventor, who was also quite an artist. He had a diorama, a very famous diorama in Paris. And oddly enough, some of the first specimens photographed before there was even a discipline of paleontology were fossils. A couple reasons for it. One, they were still, they didn't move. Just the same as early plants were one of the first specimens that were photographed. And of course, here's the scientist who was in England that invented the positive-negative process, who is a real hero of mine. But if anything, he probably did the biggest disservice to art photography that I think happened. He also was the first to use a microscope to capture images. So as a scientist, he really realized the importance of documenting science. Not necessarily using it as an art form, but to be able to communicate science. You got to remember, this was a time where a scientist would have to hire an artist at great expense. Now, all of a sudden, photography can do it for you, and automatically. Just beautiful images. And if you can imagine seeing some of these for the first time, actually close up. But one of his quotes was, "The plates of the present work are impressed by the agency of light alone, without any aid whatever from the artist's pencil." And that was a big deal. The whole idea about photography was that these objects would record themselves. There was no hand of the artist involved. You didn't need an artist. It was totally a mechanical process. Here's one of the first photos of an early photo lab. It's kind of interesting because you can see a lot going on here. There's portraiture right here. You can see he's got a time clock. He's got getting ready to pull the lens cap, copying artwork, portraiture, printing over here, photographing artwork, sculptures. And this little odd thing is a focusing device, actually, that they used because of orthochromatic plates and getting focus right. And of course, in Fox Talbot's circle, there was Sir David Brewster, one of the great scientists of his day from Edinburgh. But here is probably what gave photography the biggest boost, and that's 10 years after its invention, and that was at the Crystal Palace, which was some of the greatest inventions in arts from all over the world, which basically was all of the British Empire at the time. But even at the Crystal Palace, photography was in the area with mechanical, whether it was machines, everything like that. It wasn't in the fine arts. It was still a very mechanical device. So photographers tried to change that a little bit. And of course, you probably all recognize the name of Oscar Rylander, who was one of the top photographers, fine art photographers. So what did they try to do? They tried to duplicate paintings. And this was a very famous photograph of the day about the two paths of life. And his claim to fame was, this is, I think, 27 different negatives that were cut and put together to tell this famous allegory, which was a very popular photograph of the day. And of course, on the other side is all virtuous and good, clean living. I think I like it on the left side, but there were also other photographers taking things off in a different direction, not trying to imitate painting. And of course, many of these were related to actually the pre-Raphaelite painters, but Clementina Harwarden. And of course, I think everybody will recognize this name, Lewis Carroll, with young Alice and a little older version of Alice. And jumping ahead a little bit, we're always fascinated by things we can't see. And this could be a whole lecture on itself in terms of radiology, but when you look at these images that were actually taken a year after the invention of gamma rays, X-rays, whatever you want to call them, they had several names in early time. This was the book that they produced. And ironically, you can still buy these images. If you go on the web, they're available as fine art prints. They were never intended to be sold as fine art, but we've adapted them through the patina of time, and they're just extremely handsome images. They're really beautiful. And of course, we all know about Karl Blass. You can go to IKEA nowadays and buy these as reproductions to hang on your apartment wall if you like. And I don't know how the licensing works for poor Karl Blassfeld's estate, and I don't know how IKEA got a hold of them, but they're just beautiful, unique photographs. And of course, what would a presentation be on scientific photography when we mentioned earlier about the chosen few, then Harold Edgerton, who also worked at MIT as an engineer, but just some amazing photographs as well to show about time. And it doesn't matter where you go, again, talking about the chosen few in science. Of course, any exhibit, this was just a really amazing exhibit that was earlier this year at the Morgan Library in New York. And of course, we see our friend Anna Atkins here, along with Harold Edgerton. And of course, we all know that name, Man Ray. He actually had no idea that more than probably, 80 years earlier, that Anna Atkins was doing the same kind of work, but he thought he invented it, so he named it after himself. He called these images rayograms, and of course he made rayographs, and he made thousands of them. These are other interesting images, the snowflakes of Wilson Bentley, and I think everybody recognizes these images. But again, they were never photographed to be fine art. They were photographed as documentations of wonderful things, and he wrote scientific articles about them. But here he is at his 5x7 plate camera out in the field. If you go to, I was just in New York, they have the iPad show, which is the International Photography Dealers. And they literally have 60, 80 different booths with photography from all over the world. They had several of his photographs there, and they're small little contact prints. I don't know if you've ever seen the actual prints, but they were selling for somewhere around $2,000 to $5,000 for one print. And here you see them again. They're the chosen few that we see. You might recognize this fellow. So there's some people out here still doing this kind of work, and they're doing amazing work. Of course, this is Michael Parris. And I think he might have shown some of these pictures at a BCA. I asked if I could borrow a couple of these pictures and everything. But Michael, I love your setup. It looks like something out of Rube Goldberg's closet. But the images that it takes are just absolutely amazing. And I think the photographer might have something to do with it as well, but just absent. But they're absolutely gorgeous images. Anybody recognize this fellow? Karl Stru II? He was a graphic designer for 40 years in Germany, but he was an amateur photomicroscopist. And some of his images are just absolutely astounding. These are selling for in galleries in New York for literally tens of thousands of dollars. Just absolutely exquisite. Diatoms and the point I'm trying to make is you don't see too much scientific work in museums right now, other than the chosen few, whose names I have mentioned, amongst others. But back at MIT, one of the really big exhibits was by Georg Ecaps, who was an artist. He taught there in the architectural program and design program, but he also published many books. And the whole idea was this connection between art and science. And he even dealt with architects to show the design work. Buckminster Fuller, who we all know from the geodesic dome. And people might recognize that name, probably one of the most famous photography curators around. He's deceased now, but John Sarkowski. Even at the Museum of Modern Art, this was in 1967, which was a major exhibit. And you have to take into account the time this was. This was right around the Vietnam War, where there was a lot of money going into science. But kind of a beautiful exhibit. All black and white, for the most part. And again, we're all familiar with Lennart Nielsen. And I can remember this cover when I was growing up. I grew up in a Catholic household with two older sisters, and my mother wouldn't even leave this laying out on the counter because she thought it was obscene. To actually have an aborted fetus on the coffee table was not too healthy in our house. And of course, these types of images. Anybody recognize this?
Hubble?
Yep, it's a Hubble picture. But they could be as abstract art on a museum wall for sure. Different nebulas. Just stunning images. And it's encouraging because museums around are all of a sudden starting to show more scientific photography. This is an exhibit that's coming up at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is a major exhibit all about Apollo 11 and the history of lunar photography. So I'm really excited to go up and actually see that. But science is really catching on. Anybody recognize this fellow? We were talking about how do you tie a microscope lens onto a digital camera. He's using a 200 millimeter macro lens here and a 10x infinity corrected objective to do his stitching. But this is Levon Bliss, who does incredible work with stitching. Some of his images are more than, for a single image, he can make as many as 10,000 photographs for one image to do these stacks. And they're just exquisitely beautiful. He's done a book on them, so I encourage you to take a look at his book, Microsculpture. But the actual size is absolutely phenomenal. Here you get a little bit of scale that the bugs are as large as the people. This is at the University of Oxford Museum, Science Museum. So ever since the early days, but way before photography, this is Robert Hooke's book from 1665. And you can see that people were interested in seeing things that they had never seen before, and we're still that way today. He's considered the father of modern microbiology. He was the person who came up with the first name of cells. But imagine looking and seeing this, and if you were a layperson and someone told you this is what a fly's eyes look like, the omnitidia, the multifaceted eye, you'd be absolutely amazed, stunned, and a little bit scared, I imagine. And this carries on till today to the Nikon small world, where people are still very much interested in the beauty of science. But these images, unfortunately, are only shown in science museums. And I think we would all agree that a lot of these images would do very well in art museums as well. This is my hats off to Jamie back there. He just does a wonderful job of hosting it. This is some people at the exhibit at the Wistar Institute. But these are some recent images. Nikon Small World's been going on for, Jamie, you probably correct me, but I think about 45 years. 47? Okay. And it would just be wonderful if they did a book. I'm still waiting for them to do a book on images over that 47-year period. Absolutely stunning images. Predaceous diving beetle. And there's some fine artists who dabble in trying to document science. And in my opinion, I don't know if you've ever seen this person or know of this person, Kathryn Wagner. She's gotten Guggenheim grants, so she's quite a big name in the fine art world. An interesting book, but most of the folks in this room would never probably document test tubes or plates or whatever with a softbox right up front. So all these pictures have this big, ugly softbox in them. I don't know if it bothers you, but when I saw these images, I thought, well, why? Why would you do that? But kind of boring pictures, I thought, but nonetheless. So the whole point is more and more people are doing scientific images. This is one of my favorite photographers, fine art photographer, a woman by the name of Rosemont Purcell, who worked with Stephen Jay Gould for many years while he was alive. And of course, he probably published about 30 or 40 books. They've done about 5 or 6 books together. And I've always heard, if you want to be a really, really good photographer, what's the most important thing? Not your equipment, not this, not that. It's all about access. having access to the subject, being able to get in a behind-the-scenes look, whatever you will. What she did is she went behind the scenes in museums all over the world, everything from the Natural History Museum in Leiden to you name it. And of course, with having Stephen Jay Gould as a sponsor and helping you out made it a little bit easier, but she just did some amazingly wonderful images. Now, talking about my work, exhibiting with several book projects, and the book Hidden Beauty has been around quite a bit, and a lot of people have seen it. It's traveled to several different museum and gallery exhibits. And the odd thing was, I got a call, and this talks about how your work can influence other people's work. I got a call one time, and it was from Texas, and this woman introduced herself, and she says, I'm at Lamar University in Texas, and I would love to use some of your images for a dance, a modern dance. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And she just kept on talking. I think these images are extremely beautiful. I would love to make dresses. I want to make dresses and do a dance, a modern dance. I said, that's fine, just as long as I would love to collaborate with you, as long as they are copyrighted, as long as you're not using them to make money, that's fine with me. So you can see some of these dresses. I'm not sure I'd want to wear one of these to a cocktail party, but we have a GI pathologist who saw this, which was his esophagus. And she said, where can I get one of these dresses? I would love to wear it. So anyway, I want to show you a little bit of this. We got a chance to collaborate at the Health Museum at Houston earlier, I guess it was in October of last year. And of course, there they showed some of the dresses, and they did a big gala for a black tie gala for fundraising. And her students did a 25-minute modern dance of Hidden Beauty. And here we are, that's Sherry at the exhibit. They had an opening night of more than 500 people come to this. There were 250 people at the black tie gathering. And if this video works, I'm going to show a quick couple-minute video. This is all about someone going to a doctor's office and finding that they have a disease. This was filmed live, and if you can imagine, there's 250 people in the audience in black tie watching this. So anyway, you get the idea. In the interest of time, but here's where she finds out she has the disease, and then other dancers come out, and so kind of an interesting way to see your own photographs reproduced. So I'd like to conclude. Again, I mentioned that whole thing about lunch, so I'll try to keep on time as close as possible. But I would like to thank, number one, is thank the BCA for our support about a project that Michael Parris has instigated. Actually, it started when we were having a drink at a bar last year in Rochester, and he said, hey, how about let's do images of Science 3 again. Of course, Ted Kinsman is involved and a couple other people. But the BCA gave their support to this project, and it's kind of interesting. I invite everybody to come to the reception in Rochester, which will be in November. The interesting thing is we got more than close to 400 entries from 19 different countries. So it just gives you an idea that there's people doing incredible work in science that we never see in museums. So can scientific photographs exist as art? Well, I hate to pick on you again, Michael, but this is from one of your books. And there's still an ambiguity associated with this type of photography. Just as the intent of the photographer decides what kind of images will be made, so it's the mindset of the beholder that decides if it's art or if it's science. And I just add one more thing, or a combination of both. So thank you very much.